Okay. Relationships, an interesting territory for learning. I think it might have been designed that way, actually. With relationships, classic bonding pattern happens. So, going back to those primary cells, a highly rational person who functions very rationally, very together, highly organized, falls in love with some gorgeous, all over the place, but isn't she adorable young woman who's just the sweetest thing because she just keeps forgetting where she's put her cell phone, and you know, and she's just delighted because he's always got it together and knows and remembers where the cell phone was, and you know, they just got this lovely thing going. They're kind of made for each other, opposites attract. A few months into the relationship, what happens? He's driven nuts. Oh, why can't you find your cell phone, for God's sake, you know? Suddenly the bonding pattern changes from a happy little opposites to a negative opposite. Sound familiar? So often in arguments within relationships, we're just bouncing in and out of a bonding pattern. So underneath that is perhaps her feeling of inadequacy, which might trigger his feeling of inadequacy, which is why he became so rational and competent. So now he's very tied to the only way to be in life is to have it all together. So he gets triggered like crazy now that the first phase of romance is over. He gets really, his buttons get pushed by this incompetent idiot over here. She's now an idiot instead of cute. And she, instead of being able to respond from, oh my God, you know, I just realize that I just keep falling apart, and maybe I need to have some of that quality that he's got. Maybe I need to be more rational. Maybe I need to be organized. She very rarely would come up and say that. She's more likely to react, to hide her vulnerability, because who knows why she's done this ditzy thing for so long. So she hides her vulnerability, and she comes out perhaps as critical, judgmental mother. Why do you always have to be so logical and organized? So she starts criticizing him. So that's where bonding patterns can happen. He, instead of feeling shocked and owning how awful it feels to be suddenly criticized by her, which is maybe he had a critical father, instead of owning that and saying, oh my God, it really threw me when you criticized me, I feel a bit awful, I wonder what that's about. Instead of going to that place of awareness and vulnerability, he will tend to go straight back and to get more and more logical. So she'll get more and more emotional or critical, he'll get more and more logical, or maybe detached and cool. So these bonding patterns kind of trigger each other. So if you've got a repeat pattern that tends to happen in a relationship, it'll often be just those bonding patterns playing themselves out. Okay, now how are we going for time? All right, so this basically is the transformative area. So if you want to be the change agent and be connected with something that creates life anew instead of the old patterns going on over and over and over, which are very painful or boring or a hassle or expensive because of all the therapy. So whatever it is, or the divorce and things that go on, then allowing some of this energy to come through from that deeper spiritual level of ourselves through the heart, through awareness, we can go into looking at the vulnerability and dealing with what's really going on inside us. So with any conflict, so far, any conflict in my life has been resolved. Now, there are a zillion conflict resolution skills we can teach, we can learn about assertiveness, communicating, learning to listen. But the most powerful tool of all that I've found is the work I can just do right within myself. And it's free. Well, sometimes a bit of therapy helps. But basically, doing a process called voice dialogue, which is something I facilitate and quite a lot of people do, then you can start to explore what's really going on under the surface, because that's what's keeping the whole thing going. So, you know, you can leave that relationship, find a fresh man, find a fresh woman, a little way down the road, same thing, same old. I'm sure we're familiar with that. You know, why do I keep attracting the same sort of person? That kind of story. That's the story level. Underneath, let's look at what that's about and really take responsibility for my own part in the conflict. Then what can happen is, two things can happen. One is, sometimes on an unconscious level, that person shifts. One day, one of my favorite exes to grind, he was my number one self-esteem teacher, who was very critical of me. I used to go into a little hole every time this happened. When I started to take responsibility for my self-esteem and started to learn to accept and love myself and do all that kind of work with those horrible, yucky feelings, an interesting thing happened a couple of years up the track. This guy came round for lunch, and I was busy, I remember it vividly, I was busy stirring soup in the kitchen, and this voice comes in from the other room, and this guy says to me, "Kris, I just wanted to say that if I knew when I was with you what I know now in our relationship, I might have done things differently." And I'm sitting there going, whoopee-doo. In my pain, I've been waiting for him to say sorry, waiting for him to be not critical, waiting for him to, lavish me with approval to make myself feel okay. But in fact, the opposite happened when I did the work. Then, whoopee-doo, suddenly, great surprise, this guy started to own his part of the story too. So that was a really interesting thing. So sometimes the other person, maybe they go and do their own work, or maybe they just pick up a change in you, and suddenly they find themselves behaving differently around you, with more respect, with whatever it is. The other thing that can happen is they don't change at all. Oh, no! So they keep on going, being exactly the same person they are. But it doesn't bug you as much. The charge has gone out of it because you realize they're just a combination of flaws and incredibleness that we all are, and they're just another human being. When we're locked in our story, it's very, very hard to just let other people be a human being. We want them to be a certain way, and we get very upset when they're not. So that's a very powerful thing that can start to happen when you work with this level.